Major breaking news. The United States Supreme Court has just given another huge win to President Donald Trump and his Make America Great Again agenda over Washington, D.C.'s deep state bureaucrats. That's right, the unelected bureaucrats of the deep state try to get lots of money, almost $1 billion, and they failed, thanks to the Supreme Court today. Let's break it down when we come back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the 4 Box of Dine, a proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and I'm proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America. Thank you, 2025 Gundies Awards. All right, another huge win for Donald Trump and his administration in front of the United States Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court has just confirmed and allowed Donald Trump to terminate almost $1 billion in NIH grants, National Institute of Health grants, linked to DEI and other nonsensical ideas. That's right, $783 million in NIH grants President Trump terminated. The grantees and related people working for the federal government and or the NGOs associated with them went running to America's worst court when it comes to respecting our Constitution. And you know what I'm going to say? That is the United States District Court in the District of Massachusetts, right there in the country of Boston. Needless to say, the Boston judges granted all the relief against Donald Trump in favor of the grantees and said Donald Trump cannot terminate this almost $1 billion in grants from the taxpayers to these various grantees with these NIH grants allegedly linked to DEI affirmative action type initiatives. Well, needless to say, it went all the way up to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit out of Boston as well, the worst court in America when it comes to respecting our constitutional rights. And of course, they upheld all this anti-Trump nonsense. But I'm happy to report that the U.S. Supreme Court has just ruled in the case of National Institutes of Health versus American Public Health Association that the lower court nonsensical rulings forcing President Trump to pay almost $1 billion in grants to these NIH-related documents or these NIH-related grants and these NIH-related money, that Donald Trump does not have to pay this money. That the lower courts were wrong and those injunctions forcing him to pay the money now are enjoined itself or basically stayed. You would stay an injunction. So the Supreme Court stayed the injunction of the lower court, which basically means if the grantees want to go get their money, they can't go to their little buddies in Boston, Massachusetts and get the money from the judges that hate Donald Trump in Boston. They have to go to the United States Court of Federal Claims in Washington, D.C., where if you want to sue the federal government for money, that is where you go. There's a court specifically designed for people to sue the U.S. government for money as a general matter, and that court has been set up, and it's called the United States Court of Federal Claims in a very, very beautiful brick building right next to the White House in Washington, D.C., a lovely building. I have several friends that have worked there over the years, and that is where you have to go. And that is what the Supreme Court said here. No, you can't go to your buddies in Boston and the courts there that hate Donald Trump and get your money from them. You need to go to a different courthouse entirely, go to a different court. You need to go to the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, not to a federal district court. And that is essentially the ruling here, 5-4 in favor of President Trump. I should note that the 4 dissenters that disagreed with this on technical terms are the 3 liberal judges, Justice Kagan, Justice Sotomayor, and Justice Brown Jackson, as well as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts. But it was the 5 conservatives, including Justice Amy Coney Barrett, that ruled for Donald Trump yet again. This is a major win for Donald Trump's agenda for many reasons. Number one, it is a reminder that the forum shopping by the anti-Trumpers to go to the usual suspect courts in Washington, D.C. and the district courts there, to go to Boston, to go to San Francisco, to go to Los Angeles, to go to Chicago, in front of judges that are frequently anti-Trump, looking to be judicial activists in favor of anyone that can thwart the Trump agenda. But that this is a no-go zone now. We're seeing more and more and more and more victories for Trump and his attorneys, including the Solicitor General of the United States, John Sauer, ruling for the Trump administration against this anti-Trump lawfare. That alone is a huge thing, because at some point, these attempts at lawfare against the Trump administration and President Trump, they're going to get the message that it is a waste of time and money to bring these kinds of lawsuits. And if you think you have a breach of contract claim, and I'm guessing most of these may think they have one, I don't know how strong they're going to be, then you know where you need to go. You need to go to the Court of Federal Claims, which is not particularly friendly, I suspect, to a lot of these kinds of arguments that we've seen accepted by the liberal courts in Boston, in New York City, Chicago, San Francisco, and D.C. The second thing, of course, is that you cut off the oxygen to these liberal NGOs. It's not in my opinion, now I have not done the research here and looked at all the data, and I'm not going to, by the way. But I have a sense that if you keep cutting off money from we, the taxpayers, to these various nonprofit organizations, these various NGOs, these unelected bureaucrats known as the deep state or the swamp, if you keep cutting off this government largesse to these organizations and to these individuals that have spent their careers sucking at the teat of big government, I have a feeling that a lot of donations to left-wing causes, including to the Democratic Party, are going to start to dry up. Because as you cut these monies going to these lefties and these people that have every reason to support the left-wing agenda because, again, they suck at the teat of it. That's how they make their money. That's how they live their lives. That's how they go to dinner at DuPont Circle, sucking at the teat of the taxpayer funding, right? And big government. If you start cutting off money from these people, it also dries up their ability to be political activists, because if they don't have the money for their little projects, they don't have the money to donate to Democrats and other left-wing causes. So it causes a positive ripple effect. Remember how we talk about in law, we have brick by brick by brick, and every brick is a precedent in favor of the Second Amendment. And that's why I tell you, when I say there's major breaking news involving some district court decision in Iowa, and some people say to me, I don't understand, why is this major breaking news, Mark? There's some decision in favor of the Second Amendment in Iowa. Why should I care? Because it's another brick in the wall, and you need all these precedents brick by brick by brick to protect, among other things, the Second Amendment. This concept of building your case or your wall, your defenses, whatever you want to say, brick by brick, also applies outside of the context of the Second Amendment. So, for example, here, by shutting off $783 million, folks, almost $1 billion in NIH grants from the government associated with DEI incentives, with DEI initiatives. How much of that $783 million from the federal government, from we the taxpayers through the federal government to these various people, how much of that money do you think was going to people that support heritage America, that support traditional American values, that support our right to keep and bear arms, that support the notion of small government, that support the notion of property rights, and the traditional Constitution is understood by our founding fathers? How much of that money do you think is going to people and organizations that support the things that we on this channel support? I don't know for a fact, but my guess is not a lot of that money was going to anyone that supports President Trump and the Constitution and our right to keep and bear arms. That's just my best guess. That's what I'm thinking, but I think I'm probably right. So again, this is another huge win thanks to the Supreme Court. First of all, it required Donald Trump to do the right thing and cut this money off, shut down these grants, and then it required the Supreme Court to step up and shut down the lower court judicial activism that was trying to get in the way. I should also remind you all, and I'll do a standalone video here, and I'm very happy I did this, folks. 6 or 7 months ago, when I told you all, do not make stupid comments attacking Justice Amy Coney Barrett because it's not right, and you're going to look like you got egg on your face. You're going to have egg on your face down the road. Don't do it. Don't follow the clickbait we see in some quarters of the internet. Don't do it, because if you're a 4 Boxes Diner follower, you're smarter than that. And I explained this to you many, many, many months ago. And obviously, as you've seen, and the evidence is overwhelming now, and yet again here today in this case, Justice Barrett has ruled in favor of the Trump administration in literally basically every case that I can think of in the last year that mattered. Every one of them. In fact, it's gotten so bad from the perspective of the lefties. And by the way, Justice Barrett is simply following the law, by the way, right? She's just following the law. She's not being a partisan, but she is doing the right thing and following the law. And yet again, she does it here today as the fifth and deciding vote in favor of the Trump administration, shutting off this money from these NGOs and these lefties. It's gotten to the point where even Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, in this opinion today, or in her dissent, points out and makes a comment about the Calvin and Hobbes cartoon about the Supreme Court's jurisprudence always ruling in favor of the Trump administration. Literally, she makes that observation in her dissent today, Justice Brown Jackson. And the reason why that trend has been our friend and that trend in favor of the Trump administration has been the friend of the Trump administration is largely because of Justice Amy Coney Barrett repeatedly siding with the Trump administration, which of course is the correct legal outcome in all these cases. So, for completeness' sake, let me give you exactly what the Supreme Court had to say about why they stayed, which meant they froze the lower court's decision that Donald Trump had to pay this money out to these NGOs, these nonprofits, these various grantees, or whatever it was, and why the Supreme Court shut that down with staying the lower court decisions. Here's what the Supreme Court had to say. The application for a stay is granted as to the district court's judgments vacating the federal government's termination of various research-related grants. The Administrative Procedural Act's limited waiver of sovereign immunity does not provide the district court with jurisdiction to adjudicate claims based on the research-related grants or to order relief designed to enforce any obligation to pay money pursuant to those grants. And while the loss of the money is not typically considered irreparable harm, that changes if the funds cannot be recouped. The federal government faces such a harm here. The plaintiffs do not state that they will repay grant money if the government ultimately prevails. Moreover, the plaintiffs' contention that they lack the resources to continue their research projects without federal funding is entirely inconsistent with the proposition that they have the resources to make the government whole for the money already spent. Amazing. And by the way, folks, remember how I try to teach you on this channel the importance of understanding that a position you take in case A over here could have a ripple effect, good, bad, or ugly, in a future case. And that's why I really want you to make the right arguments and say the right things, even in cases that don't appear to be particularly important, because it could have a ripple effect. We've talked a lot about this, and here's a perfect example of how a position taken by the NGO plaintiffs that were trying to get this money from Donald Trump and failed. Here's a perfect example of a position they took in this case to get the money from President Trump, wound up coming back and kicking them right in the dupa. You see, their argument here was that we need the money from these grants from the Trump administration to the tune of $783 million. Because if we don't get all this money, we're not going to be able to continue our work. We'll be shut down and we'll suffer irreparable harm. But here's the thing, folks. By making that argument, they're essentially conceding what? That they don't got any money. No money. No moolah. No dinero. And why is that concession? On the one hand, that's good for them to say, hey, it's really important that you not cut the money off from us. That's good on the one hand. But on the other hand, it has a backfiring effect here that the Supreme Court just pointed out. The Supreme Court just says, hey, wait a minute. You plaintiffs, you NGOs, you grantees, you people that want the money from Donald Trump have just told me you don't got any money. You need this money to keep going. So what happens if it turns out at the end of this lawsuit, Donald Trump's team wins, his administration wins, and you are not entitled to get that money? Because you just told me that you have no money and you need this money to keep going, you're basically telling me that you're going to spend all this money that Donald Trump's going to give you. And then when Trump comes to get the money back from you because he wins the case and you lose the case, let's say, you're not going to have the money to pay it back to the administration. Which means that, again, that will be irreparable harm to the Trump administration, as the Supreme Court just said, because they will not be able to recoup the funds that they paid out to the grantees. And therefore, the Supreme Court says, we're not going to let that money go out the door. Because the Trump administration may never get it back if they ultimately win this case, and they may very well. All right, so another huge win in front of the United States Supreme Court by the Trump administration. The trend continues to be our friend. I'm not saying everything is perfect, but overall, things are looking good. Things are looking up for the MAGA movement, the Republican Party, the Trump agenda, and people that respect our Constitution and our traditional and heritage American way of life. All this stuff, I think, is looking good and positive. It's not perfect. Nothing is perfect except heaven, but we're working hard to do as best as we can here in the United States. And fingers crossed and candles lit, we're going to continue the trend, and I will keep you informed one way or the other here on the Four Boxes Diner channel. So with that said, make sure you follow me over there on X, at Four Boxes Diner. Don't forget to subscribe both to YouTube and to Rumble. And by the way, I'll be seeing you all out there in Salt Lake City for the Second Amendment Foundation's Gun Rights Policy Conference in just about a month. So we'll talk more about that down the road, but just keep that in mind if you're going out to Salt Lake City for that. I'll be out there giving a talk and chatting with people as well. So there you have it. I look forward to talking to you again soon, and we'll see you again real soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.